I will never be able to forget him. At night I see him more and more in my dreams, and I am afraid that he will come after me, but all over again. For as long as I can remember, I could not imagine myself without cars. As a child, when all normal children rummage around in the sandbox and build houses out of pebbles and twigs. I was up to my elbows in oil, taking apart screws and all sorts of parts with my father in the garage. He had an old little car, and the two of us used to fix it. Dad worked as a bread truck driver. But I grew up and went even further and got a job as a truck driver. I liked that job. I had to travel almost all over Europe, but it wasn't a bad thing at all, because I got to see a lot of beautiful cities. I liked this order right away. I needed to transport a shipment of household appliances from point A to point B. Everything was short and to the point. I don't usually put much pressure on the pedal while driving, so I had a great opportunity to enjoy the view from the cab of the truck. It was summer, and there were constant glimpses of forests and fields planted with grain. There was no heavy traffic on this stretch of road, so I didn't have to strain myself. I automatically turned on the music. And the cabin was immediately filled with the sounds of heavy rock. Somewhere in the distance my trained eye discerned a lone figure in a raincoat standing on the side of the road. I was overtaken by a small Ford with a smiley face sticker and an obscene gesture on the rear window. The driver stopped and opened the passenger door for the stranger in the raincoat. In my heart I even respected him for the act. At this point I drove past them and was able to get a good look at the stranger. He was tall and skinny, even though it was warm outside and he was wearing a raincoat. It was warm outside and he was wearing a long leather coat. Strange, I thought. But, as it turned out, that wasn't the main thing. At that moment the stranger looked up at me. He had the most ordinary appearance. A swarthy face and a massive chin. But when our eyes met, I noticed something. That made me sweat and feel sick to my stomach. For a moment, the stranger's face took on the appearance of a monstrous mask. It was as if his head had become a skinned skull, with sharp fangs instead of teeth. His pupils stretched vertically, and a beastly grin appeared on his lips that made me feel cold inside and my hands tremble. I wouldn't be wrong in saying that the creature was a meat eater, and his diet was hardly made up of cheap uncooked food. I blinked in surprise, and when I opened my eyes I saw that the stranger's face had regained normal features. I did not know what to think. Maybe I had imagined it all. Or if I was already hallucinating from fatigue. Meanwhile, the Ford with the stranger in the cabin was speeding forward, turning into a tiny dot on the horizon. I felt my palms sweat disgustingly and clenched the steering wheel. What I saw was so shocking that I gave up speed and weaved like a turtle. Soon, to distract myself I turned on the radio to the car news. After about an hour of commercials and other verbal garbage, I suddenly heard a strange announcement that said that outside the village of Moriv, a Ford had crashed, the driver had lost control and crashed into a pole, and from his injuries the man died at the scene. I glanced at the sign outside the window and felt cold. I was just approaching the village. Was that the same car? I thought. I felt goosebumps all over my body. Soon I could be convinced of the rightness of my words. The car was the same. I recognized it from the smiley face on the window, only this time it was covered in blood. Like someone had rained blood and brains on the car. The driver's seat was crushed so that it looked like he was not there at all, and police officers were standing near the car, measuring the braking distance. And a few dozen yards from the scene of the collision, there was a severed head with partial fragments of the spine. My eyes were staring up into the sky, trying to convey all the pain and fear. It was such a nightmare that I almost screamed in horror. For some reason I at once connected this mad accident with that mysterious passenger, and the thought haunted me all the way. Finally, on the way back I decided to make inquiries. I had an acquaintance in the police department, and he gave me a rough summary of the fatalities on that stretch of road, and I was stunned at the number of deaths on the road. Was about 10 times higher than the national average. Could it have something to do with that bastard on the road, I thought to myself, feeling a chill in my bones. Twilight was approaching, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get past such a dangerous place in the dark, but luckily it was business as usual and nothing much was going on. Suddenly a dark Chevrolet appeared in the powerful light of my headlights, parked lonely by the curb. Apparently the passengers were asleep, despite the headlights being on. There is a long tradition of truck drivers stopping in such cases to see if help is needed. I stopped, put the screwdriver in my pocket, then clutched my baseball bat for safety, and got out of the van. The passengers in the Chevy were sitting like glued men, and when I turned my attention to the eyes of one of them, I saw that they were glazed over. And unresponsive to any stimuli, they were the eyes of a corpse, of which I had no doubt. In the driver's seat sat a small, frail man. His body was moving unnaturally, and when I got closer I screamed in horror. I understood why he was shaking so much. He was shaking in agony, because the nasty thing had chewed his throat and severed his artery, drinking hot blood. All 3 passengers were also wounded and some, I think also torn, because the entrails were scattered all over the cabin, as if someone was trying to untangle the bloody ball. The heavy smell of death still hung over the massacre site. It is not strange, because several people were killed here. I tried to walk stealthily to my truck, but the creature spotted me and grinned its massive fangs. Determined to save myself at any cost, I rushed into the cab of my truck. The vile creature, breaking the windshield, on all 4s like a dog, rushed after me, spitting saliva. It was already late, there was not a soul on the road. I was only a few feet from relatively safe shelter, but the creature jumped on my back and dropped me on the pavement. I felt its sharp claws on my shoulder blades, ripping huge chunks of meat out of me. It was hard to describe in words, but I almost fainted from the pain shock, agonizing to find a way out. I did not want this creature to eat me tonight, tasting my rare blood type. I couldn't hold the bat, and it was now lying in the driveway. I screamed, trying to get the screwdriver out of my pocket, and luckily my hand fumbled for the ribbed handle of the screwdriver, and I jammed it into the thing with force, right in its eye, and I heard the nasty scream of the thing. I crawled on all 4s, but I managed to get into the cabin and shut the door tightly. I was bleeding like a shot boar, and on top of that my left leg was barely working. The monster must have torn my tendons. As I tried to start the truck with my trembling, bloody hands, the horrible monster started kicking the doors, and then jumped on the hood. I squeezed the clutch and drove, at which point the creature smashed the windshield and climbed into the cab. I already knew I couldn't survive, so I accelerated as fast as I could toward the cliff, and at breakneck speed, the huge truck slammed into the concrete guardrail and flew low. The concrete railing and the truck with all its mass plummeted down. I of course didn't remember the impact. The last thing I felt were the monster's fangs on my neck, and its stinking breath. I woke up in intensive care. As the nurse told me, my truck had caught fire from the impact and I had a lot of burns. The ambulance brought me in. There was no information about the other passenger. Of course, everyone thought I had just fallen asleep at the wheel and collapsed into the abyss, but I knew that wasn't true. My body burned, holding the nightmarish bites of an abominable creature, and what exactly I had encountered that night was unclear to me. Probably some otherworldly entity feeding on human flesh. It was clear that I would have to say goodbye to my career as a driver. Along with the burnt-out truck, a part of my soul had died in me, and now I went to bed early, waiting every night for the vile creature to come after me to finish what I had started.